relaxing time during lunch. That was awesome lunch. You know, you're pumped with protein and carbohydrates very well. With both noodles and rice, that's amazing, isn't it? In both in one lunchbox. Okay, so this is Rosenlee. We met 2 summers ago. Actually, yeah, 2 summers ago at the East-West Philosophers Conference. And the consequent summer, I went to her seminar. And she's Roger Ames' descendant, student.
The favorite.
The favorite, okay. So as you can see, the previous program, we had Roger Ames on the keynote, but he couldn't make it. And I hope that Rosenlee, Lisa's work will give us some insight about our current thinking in distributed language, distributed cognition, or the 4E, the embodiment, the holistic view on learning, whatever you name it. We've been talking this morning through Steve's talk and some presentations. But mainly, I wanted to bring the Chinese philosophy into our group. I've been voicing that for a few years, and now the seeds start to ripen. And I'm so happy that Lisa will be the first one to talk about the role of gender and race in the comparative realm of philosophy that cross the interest of us, especially when we talk about language learners, and usually reviewed as the minority, reviewed as some kind of special group, then we give them special attention. But under the comparative realm, we may rethink about the role of gender and race in the bigger scheme of ecosystem. So I'm very happy to introduce Rosenlee, and our first philosopher in meeting the cognitive scientists and the language scientists and learning scientists. So, okay, so next I should give you the lay, right? Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me just put the mic on. All right, that's good? Okay. All right, so thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this interdisciplinary conference. I'm a philosopher, as you can see from the title, so I don't know anything about the field of linguistics. So I feel like a fish out of water here. But anyway, so I hope what I offer, you can find some relevance to the field that you are interested in, and hopefully that we can have a fruitful and productive discussion later on. So from the title of the presentation, you can see that I am a philosopher, I'm a feminist, and I do comparative philosophy, which means that I do Western and non-Western philosophy as a hybrid project in my work. And if you are a philosopher, how many philosophers in the house? Okay, there you go. So if you're a philosopher, you know these 3 things are not necessarily incomparable. So for you to not know that the discipline of philosophy is actually the most male-dominated discipline in the field of humanities. So the archetypal image of a philosopher is an old white guy that, you know, sitting there contemplating about the perennial questions about truth, knowledge, and equality and justice. That image is still true today. Okay, and it sounds like a hyperbole of feminism lamenting about this world that's dominated by white and Eurocentric worldview. Actually, unfortunately, it's not hyperbole. Unfortunately. So as you can see, philosophy graduates, fewer female doctoral students than the field of chemistry, math, and economics. And now those are a hot field for women as well. And we graduate even less. Okay? And also you can see philosophy has the least diverse curriculum because only 15% of the top 50 graduate programs offer any sort of non-Western philosophy. We're talking about anything that's non-Western. Only 15% of the top 50 graduate programs. And only 10% of all the graduate programs offer Chinese philosophy. So you can see, you can imagine highly probable a philosophy graduate would go through the entire training in philosophy without ever encountering any non-Western philosophy. Okay, and so fortunately, UH system is a rare exception. We have a highly structured program, not just offering non-Western philosophy courses, but have a non-Western philosophy program in Japanese philosophy, Indian philosophy, etc., etc. Right. So what I do professionally, it's a hard sell, as you can see, right? It's so few of us doing this, right? Not just that I do non-Western philosophy, but I also do feminism. And on top of that, I do comparative feminism. Let me explain that, right? So what I do usually, either it's not philosophical enough to my fellow philosophers, because feminism usually is considered belong to social sciences instead of philosophy for some reason, or it's not Confucian enough. Since I'm doing comparative philosophy, I'm doing the hyper project instead of focus on one or the other. So the purity-wise, I'm lesser, right? Or it's not feminist at all. Okay. Because what they consider Confucianism is complete antithetical to any sort of feminist aspiration. And this is a part where racial hierarchy comes into play, right? So if philosophy is Western in nature, then non-Western philosophy is an oxymoron, right? Or at most a sub-bar philosophical tradition, right? And if that's true, then why even offer non-Western philosophy at all? Right? So this kind of a racial division that kind of make forming a global system with difficult, right? If it's not impossible. So if a feminist discourse is strictly an Anglo-Saxon, then feminist movement would have to be either a volume movement confined to the West, or it has to be at the same time a colonizing movement, right? Where the non-white are taught the superior Western way of thinking and being, so they can be a feminist. So this is sort of a racial hierarchy for me. We will have to overcome it if feminism is to succeed, right? Because either alternative doesn't sound interesting to me, right? Either feminism is a strictly Western phenomenon confined to the Western world, or it has to be at the same time a colonizing movement, right? So that we can spread the Western feminist consciousness to the non-white world. So either alternative doesn't sound interesting to me. Right? But how does racial hierarchy intersect with philosophy? That's the interesting part, right? Because for philosophers, constantly sprouting their ideal on equalities and universal ethics and morals. How does the racial hierarchy come into play? Well, I am not talking about anachronistically applying modern standards and norm to ancient philosophers like Aristotle and Confucius. What I'm talking about is the concept of race, and whether philosophers help determine the concept of race scientifically, okay? Whether that is the case. All right, so Kant is an 18th century modern German philosopher, and he is one of those philosophers that help determine the concept of race that's ubiquitous today, and sometimes deadly today, as we can see all the Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality, etc., etc. So what's the role of philosophy play in determining those concepts? Well, let's take Kant as an example, right? So Immanuel Kant, an 18th century philosopher, is a pivotal thinker in helping determine the concept of race scientifically. For some of us, we might think the concept of race sort of kind of an eternal concept existing from the beginning of time, but that's not the case. The concept of race as we know today, functions similar as what we know today, was first introduced in the late 17th century. But even at that time was really flimsy, right? So by the end, it was determined by the end of the 18th century, and Kant plays a big role in helping determining the concept of race. So this is Kant's 4 races, which is what's commonly today. We essentially know there are 4 races, right? So they're white, black, yellow, and red, right? And so it sort of corresponds to 2 geographical locations as well. The Europeans, white, and then you have olive yellow Asian and Asian continent, then you have copper red Native American, and then you have black Negro African. And these 4 distinctive races correspond to 4 distinct climatic zones. So how Kant determine the race is, the race is sort of a product of nature as a sort of our adaptive response to climate. Okay? So skin color for Kant is a distinct mark of race. And it's biology based, it's hereditary, and it's scientific. That means it's unchangeable, it's determined, like the law of nature, right? So those distinct marks, it's biology based, and therefore it's scientific. It's not some sort of cultural and social construct for Kant. Okay? And keep that in mind, Kant's proposal of concept of race, because it's scientific in that way, it was treated as a scientific discovery. Okay? And with this comes with cultural hierarchy as well. Right? So according to Kant, the first human, when they spread out to colonize the whole world, the original human, the original first humans has all the seeds and talents in them to be adapted to all different climates, right? And the white race is closer to the original humans. Okay, so the white race has the greatest amount of talent, right? And then gradually lessens, so Asian has meager talents, right? And they're in the developmental stage because they haven't maximized everything and they're limited talent, right? And then you have the red race, which to Kant is a dying race because they haven't really quite adapted to their environment, okay? And they're sort of in the savage stage, okay? That kind of corresponds to the 4 different economic modes of being as well, okay? And then you have the black race, which is, to Kant, is strong, but they're lazy because of abundant resources available in the tropic climates. So their talent is severely underdeveloped and limited. Okay? And this corresponds to 2 different modes of economic way of being as well. So Europeans, mostly commercial states, so the highest stage of development. Then you have Asian, they are the mixture of agriculture and commerce. Right? Then you have African agrarian societies, okay, some agriculture, some of the settled community. Then you have Native Americans that are hunting and gathering, so that's the lowest stage of development. So if you put these 4 races together, you get a picture of progressive humanity here. Right? You see the movement of progressive humanity start from the savage, which is Native Americans, still in the primitive stage of hunting and gathering, then you move up to the agrarian society, which is black, African society. Then you move up to Asian, the sort of mixture of agriculture, a much more complex society, a limited commerce. And then the highest level is the European. Okay? So this sort of the concept of race is intertwined with the concept of progressive humanity. Okay? So this kind of dividing the globe sounds pretty antiquated, right? Sounds pretty 18th century, but unfortunately, it's still true today. If we look at this map, this is from, according to UN and IMF, right? That's how we divide the world today still. Okay, and this is a sort of surprisingly resemble Kant's racial mapping, right? So all the developed, highest developed areas all congregated in Europe and its descendants, right? So where the European, the settlements, then they are all highest developed, okay? Second is the whole continent of Asia, okay, including Middle East, and a couple in South America, right? The least developed community in Africa. So this map is strikingly similar to Kant's racial mapping back in the 18th century. Isn't that surprising? Okay. Of course, we can talk about the complex colonial history that contribute to the unequal distribution of wealth and power, right? We can talk about that, but this is the reason. Astonishingly resembling the 18th century map. And that's still how we talk about the world today, right? We have the events country, then we have developing country, then we have underdeveloped country. And its map corresponds to that kind of regional division as well. Okay? All right, so for you folks as philosophers to find that Kant actually has a major role to play in determining the concept of race and racial hierarchy might come as a shock. Right? Just take myself as an example. I went through my whole philosophy training without knowing Kant had anything to say about race. None whatsoever, is it? Right. But Kant didn't just talk about race, that he has something to say about race. He actually have a lot to say about race. Okay? And that's the surprising part. Okay? But for a philosopher that we've gone through this whole training, what Kant is famous for is his progressive ideas. Right? For instance, Kant's two writing, Perpetual Peace and the Metaphysical Morals, in any sort of intro ethics course or political philosophy course that you will study these two books. And some would say the founding of the United Nations and the rise of international liberalism is actually a realization of Kant's idea of perpetual peace, that think about a world achieving global peace in a cosmological world. Okay? Or think about this universal ethics of treating all rational beings as equal dignity, right? We are ends in ourselves, we're never means to other people's. Okay? And Kant is probably the most studied and well-known philosopher in the world. And Kant's not just well-studied and well-esteemed now. He was actually also very famous during his time as well. And this explains how he is able to help determine the concept of race. Precisely because his reputation being a critical philosopher. Okay. Right? Because his reputation being a critical philosopher, what he say has a determined effect. Okay. And Kant is famous for this three. When he published these three critiques, that's kind of inaugurated the era of critical philosophy. See, philosophy and critical knowledge is kind of synonymous, right? That's what philosophers do. We do critical thinking. Okay? And Kant's three critiques are the inauguration of the beginning of critical philosophy. So in 1781, Kant published his first critique, which is a really huge book. Right? Everybody sleep and live with this book, yes. Right? Then he published a second critique, Practical Reason, that's about morality, in 1788, and the third critique of Judgment in 1790. So this trinity sort of completes his whole entire project of critical philosophy. So anything that Kant published before 1780, philosophers would say those are pre-critical writings, so it doesn't really matter, because Kant didn't think clearly, right? So we're going to excuse him from whatever writing that he did. And in fact, in 1764, Kant published a really quite popular book. Before he published it, Kant was famous for that book. It's called Observation, the Feeling of Beautiful and the Sublime. Okay? And in that book, he talked a lot about very atrocious remarks about women, about different group of people. Okay? But people kind of just excuse him, right? Because that's 1764. This is what we're talking about is real philosophy after 1780. Surprisingly, when Kant published the three race article, actually it's all wrong and after critical period in 1780s. Okay, so there you go. He published the first race essay in 1775 and revised in 1777. Okay? This is where it began to propose the concept of race. And understand during the around mid-18th century, the concept of race is still very flimsy, right? People have different ideas, and people have different proposal and terminology. Kind of try to jump in the fray and try to determine what this thing is. So he proposed this concept in 1777 as part of your announcement to his course called Physical Geography. And if you understand the concept of race that he proposed is a scientific concept, there is a biology-based concept, it makes sense of why that is part of his lecture on physical geography. Okay, the race it's a product of nature. It's a nature's purposeful creation. Okay, in a different geographical area, as an adaptive response to the climate and its ecology, right? So he published that. Second one is in 1785, and that title tells you what he's trying to do, right? He tried to determine the concept of race once and for all. And that shows you what the hot debate then is there, right? If it's already settled, why does he need to publish an article called Determination of the Concept of Race? Obviously, he tried to put the debate to rest, right? So this is going to do it, right? 1785, he proposed this, and in 1788, he has more to say. Obviously, the debate didn't get settled, so he had to say more, right? So in 1788, he published his third race essay. And in other essays and books, he also talked about the concept of race, although it's not the major focus of those writings, but still the concept of race is being touched upon in other writings as well. And you can see all of them are during the critical period. That means after 1780. Okay. And so, what's the connection between Kant's three race essays and his critical philosophy? Oh, a lot, because they are intertwined. So, in 1777, after he published his first race essay in 1781, he published the first critique, right? In 1785, when he published the second race essay, he also published a book on it's called The Groundwork for the Metaphysical Moral, which is a preparation for his second critique. Okay, so in 1788, when he published the third race essay, he also he also this is also the preparation for it's also published a second critique, right? So 1788, the second critique published, and this third race essay is preparation for his third critique. You got the timeline, right? So the first race essay published, then the first critique 1781. Okay, the second race essay published the same year he published the grounding for the metaphysical moral, which is the preparation for his second critique. Okay, then the third race essay 1788 is also the same year he published his second critique. Okay, then his third critique published 1790. His third race essay in his own word is a preparation for his third critique. You see the interconnection between the race essay and his critical philosophy. Okay. Kant's interest in race is not something that he did on the side. In fact, the race concept is important to his whole entire critical project. If you take his writing in history into account, for Kant, humans are destined to progress towards moral perfection, right? But if you look at human history, it's capricious, right? We go up, we go down. It seems like it's a whole bunch of meaningless stuff that we do out of no reason whatsoever, right? And Kant say that we must find some empirical proof that we are actually going somewhere better. Okay? And so race provides that empirical proof. As we see earlier, you see the movement of progressive movement, right? In fact, the human species as a whole, we can progress from the savage state to all the advanced state. Okay? So that progressive movement is mediated by the concept of race here. Okay? All right. So what did Kant really say about race? This is what he said. So in 77, it talks about how the white people has the greatest amount of perfection, right? And then in his last race essay in 1788, remember he wrote his second critique, which is on morality, universal ethics. The same year he published that. This is what he said about free Negroes and enslaved Negro actually have the same nature. They just don't have the drive to work. They cannot pick themselves up. So think about the juxtaposition here. But on the one hand, it's all about universal ethics, where everybody, the free, rational human being, have equal dignity. On the other hand, he's talking about some are more equal than others. Right? Okay. So what does this matter to feminists like me? Why should I care about this? Well, it matters a lot. Because the racial hierarchy is such an entrenched concept for us, right? This gets translated into theoretical construction as well. Okay? And because this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy here, that inferior culture is going to produce inferior intellectual tradition, and therefore there's nothing worthwhile for us to learn about it. And therefore, progressive project like feminism, it's inconceivable that feminism should go through non-Western traditions. So here, Susan Okin, and those of you who do feminism or are familiar with the feminist writings, Susan Okin's essay on is multiculturalism bad for women? And unfortunately, she wrote this, so she disowned this essay, right? But still, it's out there, right? You can take it back. There you go what she said. She said, well, Western liberal tradition is the least patriarchal compared to all of the others. And there you go, the immediate racial hierarchy goes up right there, right? So she said, if the non-Western culture are to become extinct, women will be much better off. This is coming right out of the feminism mouth, right? If that's the case, then what's the point in studying non-Western tradition at all? You gotta tell me, right? If they are all tainted with patriarchy and some are more so than others, then the answer to women's liberation, we gotta go west. That's the only way to go. Yes? And that becomes problematic for people like me. So this is another debate on care ethics, for those of you who do feminist ethics, care ethics, and Confucianism, where there's a debate whether Confucianism have anything to offer to care ethicists, and care ethicists immediately reject that possibility. Virginia L. talk about one of the major care ethicists talk about the impossibility of having a Confucian version of care ethics, right? And others as well talk about the indigenous, what we call indigenous feminism, being dangerous to women. Okay, because they're patriarchal. Then you have neo-Nautics, one of the leading care ethicists, talk about how Confucianism being patriarchal, being male-dominated, and therefore there's nothing that we can learn, really. Right? So the road to feminist liberation does not travel through Confucianism or any non-Western philosophy for that, in that fact. For those of you who do Confucianism or have some familiarity with Confucianism, you might agree with that kind of assessment. Right? Confucianism does have some misogynistic remark. But the point here I'm trying to say is that there's nothing misogynistic about Confucianism. The point is that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy at work here. Right? If those inferior culture are inferior, then there's nothing we can learn from it. But remember what we say about Kant, and what he said about race, and how race intertwined with critical philosophy. There's no shortage of people defending Kant. There are many. Even when we know what he says about race, and when we know how he intertwined with the critical philosophy. This is one example among many. She is a feminist, so I take her as an example, right? She wrote not one, but 2 essays defending Kant on race. And even today, if you go to any philosophy conferences, there will be panels after panels devoted to Kantian studies. Okay, panels after panels. But very few, if any at all, will be on the topic of Kant and race. I can recall only one I have been to devoted to that topic for the entire conference that I have been to. Right? Why is that? Because advanced cultures, that we can safely separate what they say that's derogatory from what is progressive. But inferior cultures, somehow we can rise above that. Right? If people like Kant can continue to occupy the central space, why can't other traditions? That's my question, yes. Right. Okay, and this is the latest example. I was asked to referee an article submission to American Political Science Review, as I was told, a top-notch journal. Right? I was asked to review because it was on Confucian feminism. And there are 3 anonymous reviewers. I was one of them, and I don't know who the reviewer one is. You might be one, it might be you, I don't know. And this is the reviewers' response to the article that tried to construct a theoretical construction on Confucian feminism. And you can see the impatience that people have with non-Western philosophy. And she, in the same, well, I assume it's she, I don't know. The reviewer one, in the same breath, equate Confucianism with Nazi German ideology and fascism. Right? So in the last, the reviewer is asking, what is the feminist about this? Obviously, implication is the road to feminism does not travel through Confucianism. It's inconceivable for the reviewer to see if there is any possibility that we can construct something positive and progressive out of Confucianism. It's just impossible to do so. And if that's the case, then all feminist theory will have to be Western. Right? That's the only conclusion there is. Right? Even a person like Kant construct a whole racial theory today, which you're talking about Kantian universal ethics, which you're talking about Kantian cosmopolitanism. As if that's not contemporary race, but Confucianism. For God's sake, we gotta put that to rest. And I can't explain except through the racial hierarchy that we're being handed down to, and we just buy into that, right? That's the only thing I can explain. So for me, gender consciousness has to intersect with global racial consciousness, not just my own self-identity, but the global racial consciousness, how the world is being constructed, right? So fortunately, Jewish system is a rare exception, and I learned how to construct that possible theoretical space from my mentor, Roger Ames, who is teaching at Beijing University now. And his earlier work opened up that possibility for me that I can construct a feminist theoretical space without going west. And I think there is a whole lot of Confucianism can offer to feminism, and also modern progressive project, including feminism. Right? Especially, it can offer alternative to our rugged individualism. Right? Our obsession with our individual happiness and that it should rise and fall on our own. Right? Confucianism talk about this political authority need to be premised based on our caring capacity. Right? Not just the individual caring capacity, but really institutional caring capacity. So Mencius, for those who study Confucianism, Mencius is the second Confucian master, talks about how the young and the old need to be the state's responsibility, that it's our first priority, right? The state's first priority to care for those socially vulnerable. And Xunzi is another Confucian master, talks about the 5 defects, means there's 5 different physical disabilities, and the state need to care for them. right? It's a state responsibility to care about those people. And this kind of emphasis on caring continues on. So for Confucianism, the highest political ideal is this concept called Datong, right? So in Datong, the young and the old, the orphan, the disabled, the sick, all should be cared for. And we are talking about political ideal, not just the individual compassion. And this is the Confucian political ideal here, right? And this political ideal for me is worthwhile pursuing. We don't have to all go west to travel to progressive humanity. I think there are other paths possible. And Confucianism can offer that alternative conceptual schemes, right? And if we don't think about other alternative that's possible, then what we ended up with is Trump, yes? Right?
We all love Trump.
We all love him, that's right. As we can recall, during the last presidential election, Trump promised to build a wall to stem the immigration flow from our brown neighbors in the South, right? And he opted for a merit-based immigration, hopefully immigrants from European countries like Norway, specifically some amazing immigrants in Norway, right? So in this robocall during the primary election, it kind of says it all, right? What we want to do is keep the U.S. white, and we're having more of the same. So if we don't accept contribution from non-Western philosophy, this kind of exclusionary mentality can work in the theoretical level as well, right? So what we have on the theoretical level is wall in all our progressive projects, right? Any progressive projects, say democracy, human rights, universal ethics, all this we all have to move west. Keep it European, keep it white. And we have more of the same, right? Or we can have other conceptual alternatives, right? And so as a feminist, I choose hybridity of culture. Instead of have this warring, exclusionary bag. And I think that's a much better way forward in this globalized world. I'm open for discussion.
Thank you very much. Questions? We can certainly see the theme of this morning's talk from Thorne. Steve, talking about we need to expand the unit analysis from individual to more of a either social or collaborative construction from the more.
I mean, I'm a white man, I'm an African, and I don't know much about America. But it seems to me that there's a deep contradiction between liberalism and feminism is your main argument. Because liberalism is about freedom of individuals and therefore sort of wants to divide people up in various ways so that certain people can make certain choices and other people can make other choices, and that divides you into groups. And the one way one can resist that is by becoming what you call a feminist. And clearly the logic of that kind of liberalism is the kind of globalization that we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, which is this exclusion of others, whoever they are. And so is that really the message of your talk, that the problem is liberalism?
I hope I didn't give out that kind of impression. I don't think liberalism is the problem. I'm
you
talking
don't.
about conceptual alternatives. Instead of closing in, that we only have one way to get to.
So what's the defense of
Progressive
liberalism,
humanity.
which very much comes from Kant and that kind of tradition?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
how
I
do
mean,
you defend liberalism?
there are many kinds of feminism. Some think liberalism is the answer to gender oppression, right?
But, I mean, you could turn that around and say, well, perhaps the problem is the liberalism, which gives rise to the kind of feminism that you don't seem to be approving of. I know that in America you're very keen on liberalism, but I live in Scandinavia and we think about things a bit differently there. And I wonder what the defense of liberalism is. I mean, it seems to me to be a very anthropomorphic way of thinking about things, which indeed comes from people like Kant and more famous philosophers like Aristotle as well.
Yeah, I mean, liberalism has its critics, lots of critics, right? I mean, feminists have many problems with liberalism, right? What I'm trying to say is there's not one way to solve a problem. There's not one way to advance humanity.
No, but if we just stick with liberalism, I mean, one could argue there's a problem with voluntarism, the idea that we make decisions for ourselves. There's a problem with universalism, which is deeply bound up with Kant, and there's a problem with individualism. And those are three basic tenets of liberalism. Now, on many of the difficulties you're not talking about, coming from our unthinking anthropomorphic acceptance that we should be thinking about choices by individuals that they make freely on the basis of universal values. I mean, if you think about environmental crisis, don't so many of our problems come from the fact that we focus on these human choices?
I mean, you have to enlarge the ecology. I guess what you're saying is all the other factor into our choices, right? I mean, one way to think of that, I mean, it's think about other way of thinking about choices, and Confucian offer a different way of thinking about choices. And I think we should be open to other ways of thinking. So there's not just one way to, to be an individual, if you will. So American individualism is very different from European individualism, right? So there's
individualism is different everywhere. The problem is that individualism, it's this combination of the universalism, voluntarism, and individualism, which is, as you rightly say, to a large extent due to philosophers like Kant. But it's the problem not his philosophy, rather than his racism.
I don't know they're two different things. I really don't think that's the case, which is a lot of philosophers try to make that case that his personal prejudice is seeping into his core philosophy, and I reject that. Even if you look at his universalism, it's not really universal. He talks about equality, it's not really equality. He talks about equality, all citizens are equal, except women. And then you say, this is not incompatible with our concept of equality, he said that. So his concept of equality really incorporates inequality. He made exception for people, and then say, my concept of equality is still universal.
But
then we really have to, yes, go ahead.
No, so I wanted you to finish that, but I wanted to make, basically it comes out of what Stephen said. It seems to me that there is a core problem in the philosophy and ideology and political doctrine of liberalism, which philosophically doesn't only include Kant, but the English philosophers of the 18th century. And it was the foundations of the American Constitution and so on, and in England too, the first fully capitalist society. I think what I find missing in what you're saying is the connection with a particular form of capitalism we have now. After all, central to liberalism is a certain idea of the individual who's sovereign, that kind of thing. As a property-owning individual. There's a very good book by the Italian Marxist philosopher Domenico Lassudo, who talks about liberalism's origins in basically beliefs which in some way are supported by what you said, genocide, racism, and so on. And in the current form of world capitalism, you talked about globalization, which I think is not a very helpful word, because actually it is the current form of a certain type of imperialism, which uses liberalism as its philosophical and ideological underpinning. And we really need to re-examine all that, because I don't think liberalism is very helpful philosophy at all.
Sure, I mean, I couldn't get into everything, but Kant's idea of commercial state is really in support of capitalism. You think that in the end...
But he never mentioned capitalism at all.
No, he didn't mention capital, he did mention free trade.
You, I said.
Well, okay.
More interesting for me was what you said about Confucianism.
Right.
That there is a real alternative.
Right. All I'm trying to do is just to provide alternative concepts. You know, we can talk about capitalism, individualism, and liberal, which we are all familiar with those keywords. But when trying to introduce, what I'm trying to introduce is a different kind of vocabulary, so we can think about other conceptual alternatives.
So the idea of
Right.
caring in that, which I think is really interesting and important, I know more than one Chinese linguist working on Shizhu as well in Hangzhou, for example, okay, who's brought that into their thinking. In fact, it's also influenced my own thinking. You know, but and we have people in our group, Bert Hodges, for example, working out of a Gibsonian tradition, has talked about caring, conversation as caring, things like that. So they're, to me, the really interesting things that I think we could highlight more, about basically, because they're already happening for us. That kind of
Right.
thinking.
Right. I just don't want our theoretical space to start closing in, sort of like constant walls, you kind of wall ourselves in. So whenever we think about those progressive projects, we only look to one conceptual paradigm, which is Western, right? As if there's no other conceptual alternative. When we talk about democracy, we look to the West. When we talk about human rights, we look to the West. When we talk about feminism, we look to the West. I don't want it to become to close in. I want the opening so that we can see other conceptual paradigms as possible. Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't want to frame it in terms of current the term globalization. I don't know
What I'm trying to, for me, right, I understand there are a lot of baggage involved, a lot of terms like globalization and transnational, those kind of things. But for me, I think globalization it's a historical fact we can't turn back. And I'm a product of a hybridity of cultures. That I can do anything about that. Right? What I can do is go forward. So I want to take this hybridity and see what other possible way that I can open up the conceptual space for us to think about things. So I'm not trying to be Confucian, just Confucian, or trying to be feminist, just feminist. I try to be all of different kind of thing, which is who I am. Right? And I think by being a product of hybridity, it actually becomes more interesting. I can think about those things in different ways. And I think it's more interesting than just focus on one thing and be one thing and be Chinese or be Asian and those are I think those are limited categories. I think whenever I think about when I look at the globe, whenever I look at the news, and when I think about self-identity and race, I think those such a limited category, but the effects are real. I think.
Yes, thank you for the brilliant presentation, ma'am. I don't have so much of a question as I have a comment. I think just to clarify what you were probably trying to say. If you look at races, it's not so much as one category being different from another, and the way these perceptions come down from the past. I think if you look at any race, there are all types of Indians in every single race, right? So any concept that sort of puts one race above the other is a flawed concept by design. That just cannot be the case, because all races have all types of positive and all types of negative sort of elements within them. So in that sense, I agree that we need to open up the definitions and accept good sense no matter where it comes from, rather than position one kind of set of values against another.
Sure. And I got interested in this topic. This is like a whole year worth of research I started. And I got interested in just wanted to get to the bottom. What is the concept of race? What its origin is? And for me, for a long reason, I thought it's such an opposite concept. Right? How could you have a concept of race that itself has no substance? I mean, how could you say I'm Asian? What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Because Chinese is different from Japanese and Korean and Vietnamese and Indian. And what does that mean? I don't even know. Right? And yet it's such a ubiquitous label. Right? And we use it constantly and every day, and we have racial assumptions all the time. I mean, how does that work? So I got into that, and it's such a fascinating research, and discovering Kant, that was a watershed moment, right? For like all philosophy students, I mean, Kant is such on a moral pedestal. I mean, it's inconceivable. He's not only has some stupid thing to say about race, he's actually a pivotal thinker in determining what it is for us. Right? And it just, whoa. And then I discovered Hume is pro-slavery. I discovered Locke is pro-slavery. I'm like, what? I can't teach social political philosophy anymore. Not in the same way. Right? I mean, it's amazing. Like people like John Locke that were when we built our Constitution, around, talking about that all are free and equal at the same time it's not about slavery, that's okay. Whoa. Right? And those give you a different perspective, and also for as a feminist, it gives you a perspective, why are we so harsh on non-Western philosophy? When we discover something sexist and derogatory, like, whoa, those are antiquated in the art we shouldn't study at all. Right? The reaction is disproportional, I think. I'm not saying Confucius is so perfect, it's not. Right? But nobody reacts to Kant the same way they react to any non-Western philosophy. In fact, the research on Kant and didn't really start until 2000. 2000. Kant has taught race for 40 years. And he has written more on race as much as written on critical philosophy. Yet, we selectively forget or we don't care what he said about race. Because, progressive humanity depends on the West. We look to the West, and therefore what they say that's undesirable, which is convenient if you forget, really.
All right, so we are running out of time, but I wanted to just have a brief comment on Lisa's conversation and talk with us. And I feel the same way, even though I immigrated here since I was an adult. But in here, I feel like I'm a Chinese. Who am I? I'm going back to China, also constantly adjusting my role, my relationship, everything I do. I like to use everything because it's really saturated into the being and becoming of our interactivity with family, with our role as a teacher, our role as a daughter, how to care about our parents. My view, westernized view, care about my mom is totally unacceptable. I'm just her daughter, I need to take care of her. My view is she might be my friend, she might be my daughter in sometimes. But all of this give us a very dynamic role and relationship in caring, as one of our colleagues at Tibot, Paul, talked about. We also have a colleague, Rick Hodges, talk about caring, conversing as caring. So you're talking about caring ethics. But mainly, I like to have the conversation going so that our group can hear more about the Confucian role ethics and caring ethics. So not in the universal way, but what we can learn from the Eastern culture in terms of identifying our roles and in the moral processive ontology rather than as a universal and individualistic ontology. So that's what I see the work in common between our group and the philosophers that I have been working with, you and our next speaker the next few days, Frank Perkins from here. So I'm looking forward to have more conversations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.